Interestingly enough, in Scientific American, there is an article. This is Scientific American from June 2007. Right over here. Here's the cover of that. There's two really interesting articles. One of them, on page 36, says, "Brain damage for easier moral choices." Now, this is a real short article right here. It's just the top of the page. But essentially what it says is, it says there are two separate brain areas, one of which deals with morality completely on a rational level. The other deals with morality from the standpoint of this idea that people are conscious and we should treat them in different ways than we do other inanimate objects. And if you have brain damage in the area that involves morality as treating people as conscious beings, then the issue of pushing someone in front of a train and killing them to save two other people down the track, people come to this decision like that. But if they don't have brain damage, they think about it. They consider the consequences. Interestingly enough, in the same issue of Scientific American is an article having to do with game theory. John Nash is the guy that is responsible for a lot of the public knowing about game theory. He's the fellow from A Beautiful Mind. Anyway, this is called the... Oh, I got the wrong page. Here it is. It's called The Traveler's Dilemma. But essentially, what this involves is... I might have got the wrong article here, because there's two of them on game theory. Oh yeah, it's the right one. Well, basically, what they've found is that if you modify game theory, which originally was something like prisoner's dilemma, where you have two prisoners, if both of them keep their mouths shut, they both benefit a lot because they go free. If one of them talks and the other one doesn't, the one that talks gains a big benefit and the one that doesn't gets screwed. And if they both talk, they both get screwed. And it turns out that there's some mathematical equations that look at prisoner's dilemma in a very rational way. But if you change the rules, and you can come up with a game theory that essentially what happens is that people should act in what they call irrational ways. But it's not really irrational. What happens is, if it's like a poker game. If you take into consideration what the other person is thinking, and you make the rules of game theory in a certain way, you end up with choices that traditional game theorists would say are nonsense, strange, weird. But it has to do with the idea of consciousness and this looping. Again, this is not going to make a tremendous amount of sense unless you choose to explore these issues. But they're all related, and I think they're kind of cool. Now, another issue of looping and all that stuff comes from this, my favorite nonfiction book. My favorite fiction book, by the way, is Moby Dick. But this is Gödel, Escherbach, An Eternal Golden Braid. But it deals with the idea of looping and consciousness. And part of number theory, set theory, and something called Gödel's incompleteness theory has to do with the idea of mathematical equations, statements, musical compositions, artwork, looping back on itself. And P. Doman had a vid about omnipotence. Is God omnipotent? And if you look at it from the concept of number theory, what happens is you basically say that someone that's omnipotent can perform any act, but they cannot perform anything. The idea would be that you can perform any act at all, but if you do something which is going to test your own omnipotence, that's a meta-act. And someone that is omnipotent may be able to perform a meta-act, but they may not be able to. And that would be, in order to be able to perform any meta-act, you would have to be meta-omnipotent. And if you think about this logically, you can have an infinite regress going way, way, way up to meta-omnipotence. But the only way to make things make sense in language and in mathematics, in set theory, number theory, is to think in those lines. And around the 1600s, that was worked out. And it's really cool. Of course, when you think common sense, which sometimes I don't because I've read too much crap, I just say weird things because people don't think about it that way. And that's my fault. Okay. Now, I had some other things I was going to think about. I didn't have this talk about. I didn't have this all prepared. Let's see. We got that. We got that. I think I'll think of something else, but I don't want to edit it. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. This idea of looping in science. Remember, these are all ideas that are loosely connected, but in immunology, if you end up ever taking an immunology course, it turns out that there are antibodies, and then there are anti-antibodies, and then there are anti-antibodies, and so forth. And of course, it's not a completely infinite regress. But by the way, for those that care, they call them idiotypes and anti-idiotypes and anti-anti-idiotypes. But the antibody thing that I said before is about the same thing. But it's a system that ends up looping back on itself, and it's very, very cool and complicated. But the way this all ties together is in Gödel, Escher, Bach. Essentially, the idea of consciousness, according to Douglas Hofstadter, is that if you take a system and you create numerous feedback loops so that it feeds back and back and back on itself, and it's by the way, for those that understand chaos theory, it would be a chaotic system, that somehow or other consciousness pops up. Now, the analogy I'm about to give you is not Hofstadter's, it's mine, but he gives some great analogies. I mean, the traditional one would be, well, this is his, and I'll give you mine. If you take a mirror and you hold it up to another mirror and you look, you can get like an infinite regress of images. And that's kind of an analogy, but he explains this in a lot more detail. I sort of think of it as a feedback loop for a mic that's going to be close to a speaker. And all of a sudden there's a point where it starts to give you this high-pitch 60-cycle whine. Now that's not all going to make a lot of sense either, but it's just a flavor of stuff that is, if you're into it, way cool. And all these ideas can connect so that if you're exposed to them and you read something in Time magazine that is essentially an essay about carbon credits and child molestation, you can feed back to the concept of antibodies, Gödel's incompleteness theory, game theory, and you can say, wow, you don't actually do it right away consciously, you just read it and it happens, and then you think about it because it's unconscious at that point, and it's really a great thing if you're into that sort of thing. Or you can just get laid.